seems to be that whatever is really brought to us from those people, there is a calculation. And human rights seems to be one of it. So the professor, I'm glad, he has very good analysis, for instance, from the human rights perspective. Not that we don't need human rights, but when it is the Western countries speaking, are they speaking in good faith? And some of the human rights they advocate for, are they really human rights and etc.? And should Europe be defining what is a rape, for instance, in Teso, what should be rape in Mbale and etc.? So I'm very sure we are yet to discover a lot from Professor and Mzee Peter Wankulu. For those of you that are here for the first time, this is Mzee Professor Edward Kakonge, first local government minister of the NRM government. But I think UPC and NRM are sisters, if not brothers. Yes, and there has been a claim that one who actually trains for the other. The other one comes and harvests. So I don't know. But and a retired senior lecturer and many things. And Mzee Wankulu is one of the founding fathers of Africa. You can categorize him with the Nyereres and the Mandelas, and they have a lot of in common in terms of awards in regard to their contribution to Africa. So he's a very great man in his capacity.
These human rights were defined by Euro-centered group who at that time were dominating big chunks of the world. And my assertion is that they did not take interest to various indigenous groups, particularly in Africa, because the bulk of Africa at that time was under the colonial yoke, and then the colonizers were defining what should be. It is, in my view, it is very sad, because the United Nations Human Rights Charter, if you study it, if you read it through and study it, and then try to see which country actually follows that charter, you find there is hardly any country which follows that charter. They selectively emphasize certain aspects, certain chapters, certain articles, but they ignore what the rest of the chapter says. And as you know, the United Nations was set up really by basically what were then the powerful nations. And I can assure you, not for the interests of the world per se, but for their own interests. That's why you have nations who can make decisions and impose those decisions. Whether the decisions are good for you or not, very often that's not an issue for them. They have their own interests and they protect their own interests. A very good example of this kind of setup is, I will take it, the state of Israel vis-a-vis Palestine. Some of you may know or may not know until 1948, there was no state of Israel. But of course, the Jews were there and scattered all over the world. But before the end of the 19th century, the idea of what they call Zionism, of creating a group of similar thinking and finding a home for that group. That idea started in 19th century, 18 something. And then, many years later, Israel was created. And the biggest pillars in the formation of Israel were actually people with Zionism or Zionist ideologies or aspirations to make a physical Jewish state. Now, unfortunately, when you come to the reality on the ground, as I indicated to you, there was no state of Palestine or Israel. There was a nation called Palestine, which is no longer exists. And then these areas which were occupied by Palestinians was taken over, and then it became Israel. Now, what was interesting, the idea behind Zionism, particularly after the Second World War, was to find a home for the Jews, because they're supposed to have suffered a lot during the Second World War, but unfortunately they were not the only ones, but they're supposed to have suffered a lot, and they were victims, not so much in the Arab countries, but in European countries. The Jews were victims in European countries. So the European countries had a guilty conscience of trying to create a home for the Jews. But to go back to human rights, one would ask yourself, or oneself, why is it that many of these countries, when they talk of human rights, they forget Palestine, which was dispossessed of their land up to date. Up to today, there are many Palestinians who live in camps, refugee camps, which were set up in 1948 and after. So when these countries are talking of human rights, what is the reality of human rights vis-a-vis Palestine? That's a very, in my view, a very important issue. Yes, the double standards. Then also, when you go to America, America has a number of communities, and the most subjugated communities in those countries are the local, the indigenous, right? And the people who are shipped there for labor, as really commercial entities.
The Spanish.
Yeah?
Blacks and Spanish.
No, the Spanish are slightly different from the blacks, because the issue of Spanish is actually a recent issue. And it is very strange because the Spanish, they talk about the Spanish culture, or Latin America. The majority of them in Latin America speak European language. They speak Spanish and Portuguese. Brazil they speak Portuguese. And then much of the rest of Latin America, they speak Spanish. But of recent, that also has become an issue. Because the people who set up America migrated from Europe. The people who set up the Latin American countries, they also migrate from Europe. But now those people who now migrate from Latin America to America, they have become a problem. Although they originally came from Europe. But again, in Latin America, there was this problem where the countries until recently, the countries you hear in Latin America referred to not the natives, but the settlers from Europe. And in fact, until last year, some Bolivia and some other, Ecuador and some other countries, the indigenous people were not even allowed to use their own languages until recently. They had to use Spanish. And in Portuguese, they use Portuguese. But even in the United States of America, the indigenous people, many of them were dispossessed of their land, and many of them stay or live in reserves. Places not of their choice, but enforced choices, because their land had been dispossessed. So when these countries talk about human rights, what sense does that make to you? And to make matters worse, the declaration of United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was done in 1948. Do you know that until the 60s, early 60s, the black Americans were not even allowed to vote? Voting in the United States by the black Americans is a recent thing. And yet when you read about the American Constitution, all people born equal. The whites say equal except the blacks. And the indigenous. You see, they were defining things for themselves, not for humanity. This is really what I want to emphasize. In many aspects, these things were being defined in a very narrow perspective. And yet the declaration is called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But those people who are declaring, they had a certain agenda, and it was not, the agenda was not inclusive, because the colonial countries were not included. And as you know, many of the colonies, Spanish, French, all, you name it, there was a lot of suffering in these colonies. And our concern for human rights now in Africa, should we focus on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Or should we sit down and define our own rights and then implement our rights in our own way? Because as I want to emphasize, the so-called Universal Declaration of Human Rights is implemented selectively. Is implemented selectively, even up to now. even up to now. You know, America has been involved in so many wars all over the world. And I can assure you, wherever an American soldier has put foot on the ground, I can assure there have been atrocities. Absolutely no doubt, there have been atrocities. Now, here is a country which prides itself, shouts everybody down about human rights, and yet its own human rights implementation record is definitely not clear. As some of you may know, in the 60s, 70s, and even the early 80s, America was involved in a lot of deaths in Latin America because for political reasons. They didn't want people with different political views. They wanted the hegemony for their own version of democracy, for their own version of political freedom. The same thing actually applies to many of these so-called European countries, particularly those which have colonies. But the point of this, where is the human rights issues? Where are these issues? Where have they disappeared? Issues of equity, issues of justice, issues of respect. The same problem with democracy. You hear people shouting about democracy, but almost every nation has its own form of democracy. For example, you have the French. The French don't elect the same way as the British. The British don't elect the same way as the Americans, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Germans also have their own form of democracy. So when they are talking about democracy and human rights, what the main issues, what are the relevance of these things to our own context? And what is our own input in these ideas? So, I rest my case. Thank you very much.
My name is Katom Kasa, for those who have just come today. My friend of mine calls me an economist, which is true. I'm also a human rights defender, like many of you guys. But also humanist. I don't forget that, which my friend normally wants to refute. But on this issue, I want to say that I won't discuss as an economist. I'll discuss as a law student. I respect all of you for the submission, but I want to thank the professor for starting the debate, and I also have a few comments into what he said. One, I want to accept with you, agree with you, that yes, human rights may not be observed by other nations the way we would want them to observe. That may be true, Professor. If you begin quoting on how the bombings and all that America is doing, Britain is doing and all that, we may say yes, in that case there is violation of the so-called principles of human rights. But I must be quick to add that when professors say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was forced upon us, Africans, there is a weakness there, which I wanted again to look at deeply. Now, when you look at international law, I was a student of international law, and you look at how laws that work internationally come into existence, you realize that when you look at what they call the International Court of Justice, and you look at Article 38 of that International Court of Justice, they have that article. You look at the specifics they put as yardsticks on which laws that can ICJ statute, Very good. As the statute. Now they give you parameters, different parameters, on which laws that develop and are respected internationally, the basis on that. Now, one of the issues I want to point out very briefly is the issue of customary law or international customs. Let me say international customs. Now, we all agree, for example, in Uganda, that killing a person is bad, not so. We all agree that raping someone is bad. Now, there are practices which all of us basically know that they are good. Now, they base on such practices that they think most of the countries think that they are good for them, and then they say, okay, I think we shall have a guiding principle here and there. Now, that is the basis under which what you said, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was born. So I wanted to bring that kind of background very briefly. Now, why they call it universal is because many countries believe that it's good to have them. You get it? Now, because there are those which are not universal, you may find about 5 countries agreeing on something. And you have what you call charters, protocols, conventions. You get it? All those. Now, why do we call it declaration, for example? Because it is not binding. You get it? It's not binding. It's not a matter of fact that each country must. You get it? But if you find it fashionable to work with the bigger entities of the world, to move together with the rest, then you say, I'm going to be part of this. You get it? It's not binding. That's why countries like Japan, China, and others actually wanted to refuse. And some of them up to now have not accepted fully what is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because they are saying, and they are right, that what can be a right there in Uganda may be a right. You get it? In Japan. Are you getting it? So the issue of rights vary. That was the point I wanted to make on that very first aspect. They vary, but they are most generally accepted rights internationally. Like, for example, I've said, right to life. You get it? And others, and you all accept that, okay, these rights are universally accepted and then they are good. So, in that way, we can say that, yes, as Uganda, we are part of these rights. And now, when it comes to municipal law, when you look at international law, then you come to the local law. When you have your parliament here and all that. Now, municipal law looks at what international is being accepted and finds a way of fitting it into its own jurisdiction. For example, in Uganda, you can't come and force us to do something that as a nation we think it's against our wishes. Now, unless the parliament passes an act on that very issue, or talks about it and accepts it, it becomes binding. It becomes binding in that way. So there is always a conflict and a very big topic there between municipal law, what is good for us here, and international law. You get it? So it is normally a matter of discussion and understanding what is good for your country and what's good for the rest. Because we may be Ugandans, we have our own rights, but also there is a Kenyan, there is an American also with his own rights. So now when you go to that country, again you have to look at what is existing there, but also what are rights in my own country. So these things vary a lot, that we have to understand them from a wide perspective. You talked about equity, doctor and professor. Now, when you look at the 1902 ordinance, you are going to find out how the issue of equity, actually equity in law, briefly talks about fairness. You get it? Fairness, justice. Some people call it equality, and others. Now you look at aspects that have been brought into our law so that we can have harmony. For example, we had an issue of the NACU. Now the NACU, for those of you who don't know, NACU was a young girl of about 12 years, or even below, and could come from a certain clan which the Kabaka wanted to associate with. Now that girl must have been a virgin and was supposed to be a wife of the Kabaka, and unofficially, by the way. You get it? But yes, but once they slept with the Kabaka, had sex with the Kabaka, she was only supposed to go and have another man. And the Kabaka could always use this girl before they are made a Kabaka. That person is going to become a Kabaka. A prince who's going to become a king. Now you can imagine that culture was there. And we could always say it's a good culture because it must be done. But when you bring in equity, 1902, those are the we can say now, this custom, this cultural practice is not good because it's against human rights. You get it? It's against individual rights. Now, when you look at our constitution, I came with our constitution, I have it here. And you look at, today you are talking about Women's Day. Not so. It's part of liberation. That's good you are talking about human rights. Because when you are talking about Women's Day, it means literally that there was a time when women were being mistreated. Now, when you bring in Article 21, and you are saying all persons are equal before the what? The law. Not so. Now, and you look at that Bill of Rights, where all these fundamental laws and human rights and all that are defined. And you look at, for example, you look at Article 31, rights to a family. You look at Article 33, rights of a woman, where we fall now today. Not so. Rights of a woman. Now, and you look at our father here knows very well how our culture is to treat women. Because if I begin talking about another person's culture, they will say, I'm attacking the culture. But now, why are we bringing these issues today? Because certain rights are being violated. That's why some of us say that yes, we may begin blaming the West for whatever bad is going on. But we must also accept that by putting some rights on paper and telling us that please think about these rights, somehow have seen some good changes. That's why when I looked at the concept paper, I was hesitant to begin talking about color and race. We're talking about rights. Because the rights must cut across. Rights must not know my religion or my not being religious, my being a white or black. If they are rights, rights simply mean no one should take it away from me. Those who believe in God say they are God given. You get it? It's not a duty, it's not an obligation. It's my right. That's why people say it's not debatable. You must have it. If you are not having it, you must give it to me. If you are a child, you must pay my fees. It's my right to get fees from you as a father. So when you look at international, we are looking at human rights from that perspective. My call was that we have to put on a human face. A human face, because what is good to you may be good to another person. You get it? But we must always find out what is the supreme law of the land. In this case, the Constitution talk about this issue. There are many issues which you raised in this paper, which I won't talk about unless the audience raises them, because they are pertinent. But they are all bordering on the issue of what? Rights. But we must be cautious. We must be cautious that rights, as we want them, don't give us a leeway to violate other people's rights. That is the question I'm putting ahead. Yeah, we may want rights. I may want my right. But as I want my right, I must not be a stumbling block in the achievement of another person's right. That's the basic principle. That rights must be cross-cutting and must be all round. That all of us must be able to enjoy them. When you look at going back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and look at what has been going on, because what the doctor was talking about now was bordering into international etiquettes. How do countries relate to one another? For example, Kenya did refuse to be part of the whole thing, the whole ICJ. You get it? Until recently. And there are many countries which had their objections. Of course, some of them were doing it because they knew perhaps maybe are called upon to explain, perhaps their leaders are going to be taken for questioning. But if you have an international court of justice, for example, which is also made to bring justice as it is, what's wrong with our presidents going there and explain and be accountable? You get it? Now, whereas we blame the West, which is also our right also to complain, but also we must find our weaknesses as countries. We must also find how we can also improve, how we can also add in. For example, Mr. Rugunda, I think, has been part of the UN. Not so. Of recent, not so. Yes. And we begin asking questions. When he was there, and Uganda was even chairing the Security Council for some time, what did we benefit as Africa, as Uganda? You get it? When you are chairing the Security Council of the United Nations, and our countries invading other countries, killing people, plundering and stealing. You get it? Now, whereas we blame the West for all that, whenever they give us opportunities, how do we use them? You get it? How do we use them? And finally, when you talk about rights, we talk about the issues of equity, fairness, justice. We must also agree that rights are universal, rights can be personal, rights can be economic. You get it? Rights can be anything that is good for you, for your survival today and for the future. And therefore, as we talk about rights, as Ugandans, the first thing I think to empower us all as Ugandans is to know our constitution. You get it? Unless all of us go and buy this book called the Constitution and keep it in our homes, so that if a policeman comes to arrest you, you begin asking questions. Where is the warrant of arrest? You get it? If someone is taking away your peace, you are right, you ask the right questions. So I want to call upon this government, if they can listen, at least for once. And all those guys who are daring to listen and take us seriously, that one, the way forward, if you want to observe our rights, is to translate this book called the Constitution into our local languages. So that the Wananchi, the local man, the common man, everywhere in the villages can be able to read this book called the Constitution. They don't even know that they have rights in this Constitution because of illiteracy. Yet if it was in our local languages, we would have been able to defend our rights. I want to thank you so much and also welcome your criticisms. Thank you so much.
I come to these conferences in most cases for Africa. Charity begins at home. We are talking of something extremely important. And unity in Africa is absolutely necessary. Some of you have known me, how I teach political science, economics, and philosophy. This is what I learned, and this is what I put in action, and that's how the OAU existed. Up to this very moment, I'm one of the people who are not actually happy with the education system, the whole continent. It is too much bookish, too much theoretical. We are not going anywhere. Instead of going forward, we are only trying to be a market for others. I always say it, and I've said it, and I will say it until I die. This is one of the reasons why I say we must wake up. Education system, the whole continent, we are only trained to be a market for others. That hurts me get deep. Even if we talk of what happened many centuries back and whatever, unless we unite, unless we improve the system of education, the leadership will always be theoretical. Makerere and some other universities. And in Uganda we have about 37 universities. But are we going forward or going backward?
We are going aside.
I can't understand this. Some people call me uneducated. Others chase me out of their offices. He's talking of something impossible. And they are the very same people who come and they want to be leaders of Africa, and yet they deny it. Now, I'm glad that I'm talking to my children. You are all my children according to my age. Yeah, I feel so except the professor perhaps. but most of you are my children. Some of you are even much older than you, in any case, the ones I have. Now, at my 72 years now, but I want to live about 3 times that amount. I don't know where I would be. One thing I would like to emphasize on you in your activities and so on, when you bring up your children and so on, take them to school, right from P1 up to A level. Everybody must know how to read and write. That is necessary. Not wanted, but necessary. But above that, Makerere, Togema, Sudi, whatever, all these universities. What do we really get out of these universities?
Makerere is okay.
Only to be trained to be a market for others.
The university.
That's why I'm cautioning it, that the education itself, we must strengthen it. We must restore technical institutions. They are extremely important, but nowadays the education is too much theoretical. You see me? I can dig. I can do any type of that job. Carpentry, I can do it. At the same time, I'm a lecturer in Pan-Africanism. But if you are not educated, how could I convince the whole continent to do what I say? To me today, the book I'm writing, it says, wake up. So we must wake up. We talk of Europe, we don't talk of whatever, United Nations and all these things, but charity begins at home first. And this is extremely important.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Professor Kakonge.
Okay.
Mr. Mzee, I'm very happy with your presentation. But what I want to say with the theme of today, we need to note that global human rights vis-a-vis Africa, which is black nationalism, is either a bullet or a ballot. It becomes a bullet, as Mr. Kato said, when you exceed beyond your boundaries and infringe on other people. But it becomes a ballot when you all agree consensually. Now, vis-a-vis, we should not begin copying this global one. We must come back to the ground, to the roots of Africa. If we are saying that global human rights vis-a-vis black Africans, in human rights, it's very clear you must have a right for self-determination. Self-determination for sovereignty, self-determination for culture, self-determination for language. I request that as we move forward for Africa, vis-a-vis Uganda, we need to translate our constitution in the local language so that we are equipped. We must not allow to borrow funny cultures to infringe on our culture. As the Uganda's anthem says, what the grandfathers and ancestors fought for, you must protect it and keep burning. Why should you take on homosexuality if our forefathers saw it? I rest my case.
Thank you.
But before I end, you must know that in Africa, this thing of global rights depends. In South Africa here, our role model Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. He has been just wiped off. So if you talk about black nationalism, we begin in Africa, Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki.
If you can proceed, you would do excellent.
Yes,
because you have already scored.
Akonyoma yakulaga ekyokukola. Yes. Abazungu batunyooma nnyo. So as African people, we must arise like our good friend Peter Wankulu was saying. I thank the professor and I thank Kato Mukasa as well for their presentation. I want to move away from the emphasis on human rights per se, and want to address this this dialogue this way. I'm looking at the stake of Africa, or the stake of Africans in globalization considering human rights. I wanted to move away from what was said because it was a bit misleading. And I want to emphasize the issue of globalization because human rights has been talked about by several of you. Globalization, what is globalization? Globalization is the idea that we are all part of a global community with structures to which we must all adhere. That is globalization for you. Two issues come out of what our stake is in this whole scenario. The first issue is that our stake is to bring about a new understanding of Africa to the world, that we are no longer slaves, we are no longer a cheap source of raw materials or resources, we are no longer a dumping site of poor quality products, and we are no longer mere recipients of Western ideas, including your so-called human rights. We are not. And this is what is at the center of African Renaissance. It pushes me on to the next point of what we need to do, or what our stake is in this whole scenario, which is Africanization. And what is Africanization? Africanization is redefining issues of global concern in view of African culture, African ways, and the African condition or situation. Just as the professor was trying to tell us, when you talk of democracy, we are saying we can no longer be judged on a democracy that has just been imparted on us, but in a democracy of which we are able to define. It is either that or the democracy you are going to impart on all of us has a definition of the Asians, it has a definition of the Europeans, and it has an input of Africans. Then we will be fairly judged. Otherwise, it continues the cycles that Africa must be dominated and things imparted on it. And this is at the heart of what our good friend was saying, that Africa must awaken. Okay, we talk of the liberties. Freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of worship. What have we gained from all these things? We could go on and on about this, but let me just conclude by saying that Africa must be part of laying the foundation of globalization. Globalization is taking root. It is taking root. And if Africa does not put in its part now, when it is fully conceived, we will continue to be at the inferior end. Therefore, we must be part of the foundation at this point when it is being laid. I thank you, Chairman.
Okay. This whole question of human rights is a question that has got so many puzzles. We talk about human rights, but because we talk about human rights, there are also human wrongs. The human rights movement does not begin with the United Nations. It doesn't begin with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It doesn't begin with all the conventions and the covenants that we have seen. You remember the struggle against slavery? The struggle against slavery, the struggle against slave trade, then the Magna Carta. You have heard about the Magna Carta, what others call the Magna Carta, others call it the Magna Carta. Then the French Revolution. You know, the French Revolution was fought on three principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity. That's human rights. So the human rights movement cannot be confined to the United Nations. You saw the Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty, which came up immediately after the First World War. Then you have the League of Nations. You have the International Labour Organization, for instance, was formed way back before the United Nations was formed. So all these have been struggles for the promotion of human rights. As to whether Africans were concerned really, to me that is not very, very important. The most important thing is that there are some principles that cut across. When you talk about human rights, you are talking about universal principles, universal norms, universal values. Human rights are universal in nature. They are inherent. When we say they are inherent, we mean we are born with them. You have the rights by virtue of being human, by virtue of being a human being. So when we talk about human rights, we are talking about respect, we are talking about human dignity, but we are also talking about the two key principles, the principle of equality and the principle of non-discrimination. To me, these are very, very important. We have so many instruments, so many human rights instruments that have, most of the human rights instruments are those ones that are linked to the United Nations. But the United Nations also has sister organizations. It has what are called specialized agencies, like the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is a specialized agency in the area of the rights to health. The International Labour Organization is the UN specialized agency in the area of labor and employment. So as we speak now with the attainment of independence, I think very many African countries have been involved in the human rights movement. You know, not the National Organization of Trade Unions. A few years ago, the former Secretary General of the National Organization of Trade Unions used to be a member of the International Labour Organization Governing Council. That is a very, very big position. But you also have your very own which, whom you call here every day. This is on the CRC, the Committee on the Rights of the Child.
The whole world.
Yes, it's an international body, the body of the United Nations. Professor Oroko Nyango has been also an expert on the Committee of Torture against the Committee Against Torture. So Africans have been involved in this whole thing called human rights.
And
what?
results?
Sorry?
Results.
The results as to whether or not human rights are observed, you cannot blame anybody who participates in the promulgation of the human rights in the promotion of human. You can blame the duty bearers. You know, they are rights holders and duty bearers. Katom Kasa talked about, said when you are enjoying your rights, you should make sure that you don't do what? You see, human rights and duties and responsibilities go hand in hand. Because you have a right, you also have a duty to ensure that in the exercise of your rights, you are not going to infringe on the rights of others. You have always heard people say that you are right, swing your arm, stops where my nose starts. You cannot swing your arm to the extent of hitting my nose. So I think the instruments, I come with the Bill of Rights, the International Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Rights that you have in your constitution. The International Bill of Rights comprises of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is a legally binding instrument, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which is also legally binding, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When you read these instruments, you realize that they are actually very, very, very good. That the fact that Africans did not participate in the promulgation of most of these instruments, notwithstanding. So the question should be, why are human rights not being why are they not being implemented? Why are they not being observed? Why are they not being enforced? The whole of chapter 4 of our constitution is about human rights. It's called actually the Ugandan Bureau of Human Rights. But how many Ugandans know about it? Then you also have a very, very bad constitution. This is a very bad constitution. This constitution, the 1995 constitution. I don't know whether Professor Kakonga, you are a CA delegate. No, if you are not, I don't know whether you have ever realized that this constitution is very bad.
No, it is a political manifesto.
While Article 1 of the constitution states clearly that power belongs to the people. This constitution vests virtually all the powers and authority in the hands of the president. It is the president who appoints all the heads of commissions. It's the president who appoints all the heads of the parastatals.
Yeah,
it is the president who. So I think if we can, unless we have this constitution translated and disseminated to the people, you cannot talk about the question of human rights.
Okay.
While the constitution gives Article 1 of the constitution says power belongs to the people, the same constitution gives all the power to the people.
Excellent. I agree with my brother Vincent that this constitution might be bad. Of talking that all power belongs to the people. The same constitution they talk of that land belongs to the people, isn't it?
Who are the people?
But you find that land in Uganda belongs to our people. Especially in Uganda here.
Yes, that's true.
For us, before these colonials came here, land was communal. But you find now, people in Uganda are landless.
That's true.
And the statistics I have, in the whole country, we have over 41 million acres of arable land. When we distribute that one equally, we talk of human rights. Then with the 35 million, we would have a balance of 6 million arable acres of land. Sincerely. Why did we copy the colonial mentality of grabbing land and making others landless? These are the things we should pose around. I do agree with the professor when he talks about the Palestinians. Sincerely, these Jews, they just invaded that land. That land has been for the Palestinians ever since. They came from Eastern Europe. And for quite some time, they have been disturbed by the Babylonians, by even the Romans, even Ottoman. The Islamic, these ones, jihad, which was recent, but they coexisted. They built the mosque there and in Jerusalem and the high churches, the synagogue they are there. But up to now, you discriminate them. You don't want to become stateless. It's unacceptable. That's infringement on human rights. But there's one thing, for me, I do agree as a humanist, that what hurts me as Nandala Kidutu, I should not hurt others. That is my principle. And if everybody would believe like Nandala, less crime would be committed in this world.
So it's in the Bible, chapter 6, verse 10.
People have been talking about it that maybe the stake of blacks. That's what the topic. That was what you sent me. Maybe we change it.
No, we didn't.
Hey.
But, you know, we have leaders. So,
Mr. Chairman, you are talking like as if we are being discriminated. We are African in a global village.
Blacks, actually we say blacks.
But I've quoted you several times. That discrimination is economic. And when I agree with my elder there, that when he said that the emphasis on technological know-how, who despises the Japanese here? And yet even they are not so much attractive. But because economically they are powerful, people respect them. So in the moment we economically empower ourselves, regardless of shape, color, people will respect you. I rest my case. I thank you.
Thank you. Now this is a lost opportunity. But when the ICC was being established, where were the Africans putting in their input? No, you leave poverty.
Okay.
Where were the Africans when ICJ was being established? When ICC was being put in place? where are the Africans? Where is their input? And are they emphasizing the situation and condition of the African people? Or are they merely agreeing?
Okay. Members will talk about that. But you know that the ICC was formed at their own platform. Like you were saying, Rugunda went there. There is nothing you can bring from there. These are their own structures at their home. They are the ones with they just put out.
I want to begin from the point where the argument of Mukasa and the question Kasozi has just asked. I think all of us, and Mukasa as an economist and a person who has studied international issues to do with international relations and the integration of international economy, knows that all international policies have their basis and foundation from economics. Once you begin from there, you will then get an answer, and a correct one as such, to Mr. Kasozi's answer. Mr. Chairman, you know that if you are economically weak, in as far as international relations are concerned, or in international negotiation, you have to have something to put on table in order for your argument to hold ground. People always talk about the issues of America and why the blacks started voting in much later. And considering the definition of this man, democracy is this for the people. But this word people in the American context is that you must be a contributor in the American economy.
Actually, during then, women were not voting.
Yes, that because just the reason was that
black.
By then women had no right to hold property. Now, everyone who held property was now people. That is the context. And in the international relation, if we can borrow the thing people, you are only people. Uganda is not people in that context. It is not, and therefore, that's why they bring out this thing called the Rome Statute. America, which is people in quote, refuses to ratify, but Uganda ratifies. We are about 36 million Ugandans in this country. No problem. But I want to ask, and our GDP is about 7 something. What is your contribution as in Wagaba to that, to the national economy? And what can you put on table to be considered in a country or in this state?
Okay, it's a rhetorical question.
That's why I'm also doing it, answering in that way. Mr. Chairman, I want... No, you asked and I've answered.
He has answered logically and
yes. No, Mr. Chairman, there is also this thing, people talk about our constitution, the people. I am one of those who are considering a petition for a constitutional amendment. This word people was technically placed there for some political calculation. It is the word people, as we all know, is abstract. Who is the people? I want, for me, I think we should replace the word people with either Ugandans or us. Power belongs to us. That's me. But Mr. Chairman, let me get to my own discussion. For me, I think that when we talk about issues of these international statutes, human rights, forcing it, for me, I think if we are to be relevant as Pan-Africanists, we must stop the issue of blaming the foreigners. We should stop. Because if they went about 50 years ago, 50 years ago, and they gave you what you want to call political independence, you know, you decide your own destiny.
No, actually, the question is, did they go?
Mr. Chairman, whether they went or they did not, at least they gave you some power to determine your own destiny. There you can debate.
They went and
The
remained.
issue of going or not going,
No, they went and remained. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the issue of going and not going, that is Pan-African issue. And unless we agree that these guys actually gave us some kind of independence, that we must determine our own destiny. I want all of you as Pan-African, who of you has ever gone back to study our own African justice system? How was African in the African setup addressing the justice issues? Look at African morality, how we are addressing our own morality in the African setup. Now, I want to ask, in the African setup, well, we were allowed to marry as many as we could, either look after or satisfy or all that. But look at the Western style. You have one, but you're allowed to have as many concubines as possible. Which one is better? Having one in the house and you have about 100 concubines out there, or having 2 or 3, 4, that if you are not in this house, the other one knows I'm there. Which one is better, Mr. Chairman?
And somebody else helps you with this.
No.
Because a gap must not be.
Mr. Chairman, unless it is for argument's sake, but if it is for truth, you go back and you realize that in the African setup, morality was good. Talk about these issues of homosexuals. We can agree that homosexuals actually existed even then. Now, Mr. Chairman, there is an issue, you know, that Kasozi mentioned about issues of globalization. How, and this I want to pose to the high table, because I am not, me have refused, I am not a Pan-Africanist, myself, I am not. How do you Pan-Africanists want to advance your so-called Pan-Africanist ideology in the face of globalization? I hope you know you get globalization in the real context of globalization. Thank you.
It must put in its input. If it's economy and international economics, we must be there.
Okay.
If there are debates, we are there. If we are doing it here in Uganda, we must contribute something to
I
the
think
globalization.
point understood. The one who asked
He has even answered.
is suggesting that he has understood by facial expression.
His answer suggests that Africa has an alternative to what we are being provided with. I am an economist like Kato, and you know that most developed economies or developing economies first formulated what we call economic or development ideology. The Western countries fronted what they call capitalism. The Eastern Europe fronted what they call socialism. Germany is fronting what they are called social something, and so on. Now, what is Africa's ideology? That it must go, because you must go on the table. If you are going to negotiate with somebody, you must have your ground, you must have your alternative to his. What is Africa? Look at this nation, where you have socialist policies like UPE, you have socialist policies like Ibonaba Gagawale, you have socialist policies, but you have the method of implementation is capitalism, and you're talking about development and you're talking about engaging, my friend Kasozi. What are you going to engage? That is in economics, it's called economic confusion, honestly.
You know, political science is a superstructure. All these people who call themselves economists.
No way, it came from economics. That's why it has a political economy. What are you talking about?
Now, you even don't know these things. You should contact me, I teach you political economy. From the Marxist perspective, they say the best determines the superstructure. The economic best determines the political superstructure. But from a realist perspective, politics determines what? Determines economics and every other thing. So all these ideologies we are talking about are political ideologies, not economic ideologies. Capitalism, socialism, left wing, right wing, all these ones are political ideologies, and I think Professor Kakonga will agree with me, having been a politician for this long. So we should not confuse people with these things, telling them that they are economic ideologies. These ones have never been economic ideologies. At best, you can call them political economy ideologies.
You have not qualified to be an economist unless you have contributed to the knowledge of body of economics. If you're talking of 1 degree being an economist, you lie to yourself. No. But to emphasize the point is that in reality, capitalism, capitalism and socialism merge. They are not as theoretical as you learned them in school. In the reality and the practice of them, they emerge.
Okay.
That's why you can have.
Let me finish my point.
Please.
That's why you can have social concepts working in capitalist setting, like in America, the social welfare. The social welfare, but isn't America purely capitalist?
My question is to bring this debate back home in Uganda, because in Uganda here we have the black people with black skin, and some people who are white but with black skin, and some of them are leaders.
Somebody is actually saying that even black people.
So I would like to direct this question to the panelists, Mr. Kato or Mzee Peter Wankulu, that what's your take on the situation of human rights in Uganda? Yes. Because we've seen so many people's rights being abused. Last week I was watching on the television. Is it last week or something? That the former leader of opposition was arrested 4 times, arbitrary arrest. No charge at all, but he was arrested. What's that? Does that mean that we are moving to maybe what people are talking about here, that democracy? So I would like you maybe open up.
It was none of that. There's a way power is being displayed.
Some of you talked about it in any case. Pan-Africanism, if I know my English well, means working together. Togetherness is pan, working together. And also there was a point that talks about independence. The Europeans used to say, you are not independent yet. But for us, we said, no, we have got a lot of educated people. We can rule ourselves and so on. I said, no, you remain about 200 years or 300 years.